Alice, a 25-year-old waitress at the upscale restaurant La Fontaine in Raleigh, North Carolina, is a passionate person with a passion for music. Despite her humble appearance and life revolving around her daily work, Alice has always cherished the dream of studying at a prestigious music academy. With a natural talent for playing the piano and a heart full of enthusiasm, she quietly practices every day, hoping to one day make her dreams come true. But amid the pressure from her job and wealthy clients, Alice often feels the distance between her and the world of music she dreams of is too far. It was at La Fontaine that Alice's life began to change when she met Richard Hamilton, a wealthy but arrogant businessman who challenged and made her show her talent in an unexpected way. On a crowded Friday evening at La Fontaine, Richard Hamilton's arrival immediately caught everyone's attention. A wealthy businessman known for his arrogant demeanor, Richard walks into the restaurant with a group of friends in an atmosphere of complacency, as if he owns the whole room. With cold eyes and a half-smile, Richard quickly made the employees straighten their backs and be more careful with each step. However, his attention doesn't stop at the glamour of the restaurant. After observing for a while, Richard's gaze stopped on Alice, a waiter with a calm appearance but exuding an inexplicable difference. A smile flashed across his face, signaling that this evening would not go as usual. Richard's presence not only brought pressure to Alice, but also the beginning of an unexpected confrontation where she faced challenges both in terms of her talent and her self-esteem. Richard Hamilton, with his smug appearance and arrogant voice, did not miss the opportunity to make Alice the object of the pastime. From the moment his gaze stopped on Alice, there was something in Richard's attitude that made her feel uncomfortable. As Alice approached Richard's table to serve, she noticed his implicit smirk. Starting with an ironic comment about her name, Richard makes it feel like he's playing a game of searching for the secret she's hiding. Alice, despite her annoyance, kept a professional smile, responded politely, and left. But Richard had no intention of stopping there. He is loud, deliberately attracting the attention of those around him by questioning her interests and talents. When Alice mentioned that she had played the piano, Richard's eyes flashed with a mischievous glint. He immediately challenged her to play a piece of music right at the restaurant's piano. The offer wasn't really an invitation, but more than a trap set up to humiliate her. Alice, who is accustomed to difficult guests, is confused by the increasing pressure from the prying eyes of those around her. Her heart skipped a beat as she tried to say no gently, hoping that the rejection would make Richard give up. But Richard, refusing to give in, let go of ridicule like a sharp blade. It turns out that you are just a person who says but does not do, which is disappointing. His words seemed to tear Alice's calm shell. She felt her throat choke, her chest clenched with a mixture of shame and indignation. But behind her gaze looking down at the floor, there was an underground wave of pride rising. She remembered what her mother once said. Never let anyone make you feel small. You're stronger than they think. Alice's gaze shifted from embarrassment to a new determination. She didn't answer right away, just quietly raised her head, looking directly at Richard with a look that startled him for a moment. Alice didn't need to say another word, but in that moment, she knew that she couldn't let his ridicule overshadow her self-worth. Alice took a deep breath, trying to stabilize the beating heart rate in her chest. Under the prying eyes of Richard Hamilton and the other guests in the restaurant, she walked toward the piano. The sound of her high heels echoed steadily on the wooden floor, beat by beat as an affirmation that she would not let herself be succumbed to anyone's ridicule. Richard sat back in his chair, his lips smirking defiantly. "Surprise me, Alice," he said, in a tone that was half teasing, half commanding. The people around him had already begun to turn their heads, their eyes full of curiosity and waiting. Alice sat down in front of the piano, feeling the cool keys under her fingertips. It had been a long time since she touched the piano, but each note seemed to be still etched in her memory. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the surrounding noise dissipate, leaving only her and the piano. When her fingers touched the first key, the whole space seemed to go silent. A gentle and serene melody begins to reverberate, dispelling the tension in the atmosphere. Alice doesn't need to look at the music. Each note seemed to find itself, as if they were always there, waiting to be released. When the music played, the embarrassment and pressure in her gradually dissipated, replaced by confidence and a sense of being true to herself. Richard raised his eyebrows slightly. The arrogant smile on his lips gradually faded, replaced by an unconcealed look of surprise. Alice's fingers glide quickly across the keys, creating an emotional music that is both gentle and powerful. She no longer plays just to respond to a challenge, but to assert herself, that she is not just a despised servant, but a human being with undeniable talents and values. When the music ended, the last echo of the bass note settled in an unusually quiet space. A few people in the restaurant began to applaud, and the applause quickly spread everywhere. Alice turned around, her eyes meeting Richard's. He didn't say anything, just looked at her with a look that was hard to read. But Alice didn't care. She stood up, stepped off the piano with a slight smile on her face. This time, she was the one who took the initiative, leaving Richard and his arrogance behind. After Alice's performance, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed completely. From the noise of mocking laughter and gossip, people now move into an admiring silence. The eyes of the guests turned to Alice no longer of curiosity or disdain, but of amazement and admiration. Her music surprised them, touching deep emotions that they didn't expect. Richard Hamilton, who had been leaning back in his chair with a calm demeanor, now leaned forward slightly. The smug on his face gave way to an unpredictable expression. There was a glimmer of skepticism in his eyes, as if he didn't believe that the woman he had mocked could make the whole room fall into such silence. Alice walked slowly back to her position, her shoulders straighter, her eyes shining with a confidence she had never felt so strongly. Whispers of applause emerged all around. An elderly visitor nearby whispered, "I never thought I'd hear such a piece of music here." Another nodded, agreeing, "She's really talented." Richard could not turn a blind eye to the change in the atmosphere. He took a sip of his wine, trying to appear casual, but his attention was clearly still on Alice. He cleared his throat, breaking the moment of silence. "Not bad, Alice. But I didn't think you hid your talent so much." Alice turned to look at him, her eyes lit up with calmness and determination. "There are things that need not be shown, Richard," she replied, her tone both gentle and powerful. "I just think that sometimes people need to prove that they're worth it. Not because of someone's challenge, but for themselves." Her words were like a definitive response, making Richard unable to continue his sarcastic words. He smiled faintly, but it was clear in his eyes that the image of Alice was different. No longer a waitress he easily looked down upon, she was now someone who caught his attention, and perhaps an opponent he didn't expect. Alice sat down, her hands still trembling after putting all her heart into the music just now. But in her heart, an extraordinary relief overwhelmed, as if all the pressure, doubt, and ridicule of Richard Hamilton had vanished. She doesn't need anyone to recognize herself as a winner. The atmosphere around her and the admiring eyes from everyone said it all. The guests began to applaud, at first only a few people. Then the whole room seemed to explode with applause and cheers. A young woman stood up, her eyes glittering with emotion. "She's amazing. I've never heard such good music." The man sitting next to her nodded, smiling and applauding. "She doesn't just play music. She told a story." Richard Hamilton, who had always maintained an arrogant self-confidence, now looked relegated to the dark corner of the room. He tried to laugh to hide his confusion, but his gaze betrayed. Richard couldn't deny that Alice, whom he had once looked down upon, had just created a moment that he couldn't overwhelm. Alice didn't look back at Richard. Instead, she focused on the guests who were expressing their admiration. Her smile is not the smile of the winner, but the smile of the one who has surpassed himself. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of humility. "I just want to share a part of my passion." An older guest, who seemed to be famous in the art world, stepped up to Alice. He bowed his head to greet her with respect and said, "You're not just a talented artist. She is an inspirational person. Thank you for giving us an unforgettable evening." Richard stood up and walked towards Alice, But this time he didn't have the usual arrogance. He stopped in front of her, hesitated, as if he wanted to say something. But Alice only smiled slightly, her eyes calm but steadfast, as if she had overcome all the barriers he had set. That evening, Alice not only wins the challenge, but also wins in asserting her worth. She didn't need recognition from Richard or anyone else. Her talent, courage, and passion told the story, and it was the most beautiful victory. After the performance, as the lights faded and the air in the room calmed down, Alice sensed a great change approaching. Some guests lingered to express their admiration, while others gave her warm smiles from afar. Suddenly, Mr. Harrison, the elderly guest whom everyone respected, walked over with a friendly smile. "Alice," he said, his voice deep and firm. "I've heard a lot of performers in my life, but what you brought tonight was really special. She doesn't just play music. She told a story with her emotions, which few people do." Alice blushed slightly at the compliment, but her gaze remained calm. "Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to convey what the music has taught me." Mr. Harrison nodded. His eyes lit up with the idea that had just come to him. "I think the world needs to know about your talent. I'm hosting a series of concerts in major cities in the next few months, with the aim of showcasing talented but lesser-known artists. I want to invite you to participate." Alice could hardly believe her ears. This opportunity was like a dream that she never thought would come true, at least not so soon. She hesitated, looking for an answer, but Mr. Harrison was quick to answer. "Don't worry about the details," he said, smiling reassuringly. "I'll take care of everything. The only thing she needed to do was bring her heart to the stage like tonight. You can think about it further, but I hope you will accept it." Alice nodded, a feeling of gratitude welling up in her chest. "I am very honored, sir. I will consider it and send a reply soon." When Mr. Harrison left, Alice stood silent for a moment, allowing herself to be filled with joy and anxiety. She knew that this was not only an opportunity to prove herself but also a great responsibility. But looking back on what she had been through, Alice understood that she was ready. Her eyes touched the piano, still standing there quietly after witnessing to one of the most memorable moments of her life. Alice smiled. A door had opened, and she knew she just had to be brave enough to walk through. The story of Alice is a vivid picture of the will, determination, and latent strength within each person. From a young girl facing suspicion and ridicule, Alice has risen with talent, patience, and a belief in her own worth. Through the challenge with Richard Hamilton, she not only proved her ability to excel but also showed the power of humility and sincerity. Through the notes, Alice told her own story, one that touched people's hearts and inspired them. Not only did she win the challenge, but she also found a new opportunity to bring her music to the world. The main message of the story is that believing in oneself and being brave in the face of adversity can open unexpected doors. Life is always full of challenges, but it is the way we face them that will shape who we are and our future. Alice has proven that, sometimes, with a determined heart and a spirit of not giving up, we can turn doubts into affirmations, and limitations into milestones to overcome.